percentage points away from belief in global warming and towards a more healthily skeptical point of view. And that, they said, was a record. But this time, the same thing happened in 1 hour when the polling organisation Roy Morgan did a minute-by-minute tracking poll of 350 balanced selected audience who had buttons they could press to say who was winning. And at the end of that hour, I had shifted 9% of that audience in just 1 hour. And they said that that, to their knowledge, was unprecedented in the history of polling. They said never had so many people changed their minds so quickly. Now, why was this? It was because the media there had done their level best for years not to give the other side of the story. And when eventually the National Press Club decided it simply had to do this, for the first time, and I mean for the first time, many citizens of Australia who had never heard that even there was a serious argument against all this nonsense, finally heard it for the first time. The scales fell from their eyes and they realized they had been misled. So
simply amazing. Simply amazing, Lord Monckton. Look, Mark Tursick, the former Goldman Sachs operative, managing director, the head of the Nature Conservancy, he was in town here last week, and they're the ones that will swap your government debt for your lands and carbon footprints. And our guys got an interview after his speech. He agreed to it, but when they came up and said, what about Obama's pledge to, quote, bankrupt the coal companies that supply half our power, he suddenly freaked out and said, I'm not going to talk to you, and ran off. And that's what I'm seeing everywhere. Al Gore won't debate you after many years of challenging. We have James Cameron. The director starts challenging people, then backs out because it's so childish that they want to ignore all the real environmental issues, but instead guilt us all into paying them some type of carbon tax, in many cases to individual groups. But I've seen this same thing. They won't debate me on radio when they've set me up as a guest. As soon as I start bringing up facts, they say, that's it, I'm not doing this. So it was this attempted hoax, just to point out how far we've come, that no one could ever debate this. There's no scientists that don't agree with us. And it turns out it was all manufactured rubbish. I mean, is this a death blow? Because you would think it would be. Now they run in abject fear, and they've got the big mega money behind it. But they're still just force it through, and now we see their cheerleaders all over U.S., British news saying authoritarianism is good when it's for the earth. I mean, don't we just need to get down to calling them what they are? They don't think they're helping the earth. I've run into these people too much. They are cold-blooded, and when you show them you know the game, they're like vampires at high noon. They run.
Oh, they run a mile. There's no doubt about it. They are running very, very scared indeed. They've seen what's happened to the Gillard government in Australia. It's made itself one of the most unpopular governments in the history of democracy because it has pushed this issue beyond all reason or sense, because otherwise it can't cling to coalition with the Greens who hold the balance of power. They've sold their soul for the sake of short-term power. They will be out of office certainly for a long time from the next election, and possibly forever. And other people watching around the world have seen the utter abject collapse of the Australian Labour Party in the polls, the hatred of it, which is now evident throughout Australia. And they've realised that if they try to do this anywhere else, they're going to get the same reaction. So their tactic has changed. Of course, they'll continue not to debate, because the more this is debated, the more people wake up and realise there's another side to the story. The last thing they want is that. What they will do is they'll pick off industries one by one, starting with coal. This is happening in Canada, for instance, as we speak. The government had said very firmly it wasn't going to introduce a carbon tax, and then moments later along comes Environment Canada, another of these lobbying groups which in fact operates under the guise of a government department, and it said we're going to shut down the coal industry in Canada, and here are the regulations by which we're going to do it, and they got the backing of the Canadian government for this. Now, so far these regulations haven't gone through the House, but I've been asked to do some costings on it. I've had a look at it, and it would be 10 times more expensive, in fact 18 times more expensive to introduce regulations of this kind worldwide, like the Canadian ones, than it would be to sit back and just pay the cost of any climate-related damage, even if the global warming was as much as they said it was going to be, and even if it was going to cause as much damage as they said it would, neither of which things is in the least bit likely to be true. So the fact is that on the arguments, these people are finished, they're on the ropes, they're holding endless inquiries into why it is that their public relations campaign has been so unsuccessful. The one thing they will not admit is the reason they've failed is that they are not telling the truth, and everybody can see that.
Well, Lord Monckton, that was my next point. I saw in the BBC yesterday, the headline that top, global warming spokesman says the problem is scientists aren't articulate and the global warming climate change group is just too scientific and doesn't have spokespeople. They've spent tens of billions. They've got all the slickest PR, Hollywood behind them. I mean, that's another grand hoax that they're the little David and we're the big wicked Monckton, Goliath coming at them when it's the opposite. I mean, it's been ragtag people for 20 years being demonized with calls for your arrest, calls for my arrest. We're kooks, we're scum, we're liars, we're dangerous, we're Nazis, and professors being run out and sued and just every form of persecution for our heresy. With all their slick PR, the truth is trumping them, and the dragon is writhing, claiming that we're big, mean bullies. I mean, is there no end to the unmitigated hubris that these clowns exude?
Well, for every hubris, as they used to say in ancient Greece, there is a nemesis, there is a reckoning. It is coming. It's already here, in fact. That's why the desperation of these people is becoming so evident. Al Gore, with his huge attempt at a relaunch, carefully timed to be September the 14th, because his advisors had told him what I thought might be the case, that we might see a record low sea ice extent in the Arctic this summer. We didn't, as it happened. It was just a little bit above the 2007 low, so that backfired on him. Then he made an utterly lackluster, lying speech about how we were all in the pay of big oil, just as previously the tobacco industry had been paying spokesmen to lie about things. And there was smear tactics, and there was the usual parade of natural disasters, all of which were quite improperly blamed on global warming. These people are on the run. They can't believe how quickly this collapse has come after the massive propaganda budgets that they've spent. But the fact is that without the truth, it doesn't matter how much propaganda messages you try to get across. We saw this with Hitler, we saw this with Stalin and Mao. If you go on lying, eventually the people will see through you, and the lies will not work, however much you spend, however many guns you point at them, however many threats you make, however much you try and try and try again to denigrate and belittle those who disagree with you. The truth will out. People are now realizing that this has been staggeringly oversold, that if there's a problem at all, it is a small one, it's containable, it requires absolutely no action now. After all, there has been no global warming for a decade. That was a point that Al Gore very carefully concealed during his presentation when he was trying to attribute a lot of natural disasters. And
it was a total bomb. Almost no one watched it.
Well, in fact, they tried to claim that millions had watched it, but even that looks like a made-up figure. It looks as though something like 17,000 people worldwide watched it. This is a big turn-off now. The BBC has recently circulated a memo saying, for heaven's sake, stop doing climate change stories. There's nothing that loses us 1 million viewers every time you mention it than wretched climate change. They've all realized this is finished as an issue. And now they're desperately trying to get the last few fistfuls of taxpayers' dollars into their capacious trouser pockets before they all run away and hide.
Well, Lord Monckton, that's my point, is they are, I saw literally 20, 30, it was more than that, major climate priest, guilt priest, say, Al Gore, sit down, shut up, you can't do any good here, you're making us look bad. And they basically have now publicly stated they want to go with a stealth system, keep brainwashing the kids, where the seasons they are now teaching them are unnatural, any trees cut down are not renewable. They mainly just want to prey on the children now that they know people are awake and kind of go back underground and then just try to push through some new carbon taxes. Because as you said, they've openly stated that every time they now try to indoctrinate adults, people begin to, basically smell the liquor that made them sick the night before, and they become nauseous. And so again, they're just trying to prey on children and college students and others. But what about...
Now, there's a way of dealing with that, Alex, and that is what we did in the UK. In fact, I was one of those who helped to draft the law when I was working for Margaret Thatcher in 10 Downing Street. And we put together a law. It was actually brought in a couple of years after I left Downing Street, but we were well on the way with it while I was still there. And that law made it illegal to subject children to political propaganda in schools. And it was that law that we were able to use to bring Al Gore's movie in front of the High Court and get the High Court to find that unless 77 pages of corrective guidance was sent round to every school in the land, that film couldn't be shown because it was naked political propaganda. So what I would recommend is that in those countries that don't have that law, they should introduce it, because it gives parents then some power over these maniacal Marxist and fascist teachers. Because they can simply say to them, right, we're hearing from our kids that you're filling them with environmentalist propaganda. We're going to take you to the court for a criminal offence of propagandizing children in school, and you can go to jail for that. And that makes our teachers in school just that little bit less badly behaved than they are, say, in the United States. So that's something I offer to the Republicans as a way out of this indoctrination of children. It's a very, very serious problem, because children don't have enough mathematical, physical, or economic knowledge to understand what rubbish this all is. It's a very potent message. We're saving the planet. Even the tiniest bit of extra CO2 is going to cause terrible damage. You can see how easy it is to say this nonsense and how very difficult it is to refute it unless the people you're talking to have some knowledge of the basic math, and children don't. That's why this propaganda has succeeded, and the way to stop it is to make it illegal.
And point out that it's going on so that parents can go check out. I mean, I remember just last year, Al Gore was taped at a stadium, it was audio, telling fifth graders that, your parents or their parents might not have liked black people, but people stood up to them, and so good was done. Well, it's the same thing with climate change. You've got to confront your parents, you know best. And then we've seen others compare it to racism now. I mean, it's just so diabolical. And then telling children, go confront your parents, you know best. I mean, this is the state, and this swollen, discredited, groping creature, in there in our face. My final question for you is this. My grandmother, on my mom's side, was living on her Social Security. She worked more than 40 years. My grandfather's been dead a long time, and they've frozen the cost of living expense. And I've gone over to her house sometimes in the summer, and it's 110 degrees here in Austin. She's got the windows open, and I say, why don't you have it open? She goes, well, I don't have the money, because the power prices have almost doubled in the last 5 years. Austin Energy's talking about a 60% increase in just the next 3 years. That's their official numbers. And they say it's for climate, because they've shut down a bunch of power plants the last 3 years, and they're shutting more down, and only insiders like G are making money. And it's literally, to even cool a small house now, thousands a month instead of a couple, $300, $400, $500. I mean, in some cases it's more than double. And now they're saying more. Now, you got people living all over the north of this country now, a new phenomenon where their electricity gets turned off, mainly old people, and they're found frozen to death in their homes, or they die of carbon monoxide by opening up their stoves and huddling near them. The poor, I mean, hundreds and hundreds are now.
I think this is terrifying. It is the utter callousness of these wretches that they will condemn old people, vulnerable people, sick people to death, literally to death, by freezing in the cold weather or boiling in the hot weather, when cheap electricity delivered from coal is readily, easily, and these days safely available. It's an outrage that they're doing this, that they're literally killing their fellow men by the hundreds of thousands all over the world. Of course, it's by the millions in Africa, where they're not being allowed to have electricity, where you've got the goons going in the name of saving the planet and closing down villages because they want to declare that an area where only trees can be grown so that they can gain some sort of expensive carbon credit from the West, and to heck with the people who are scratching a living there. This is what's now happening. These ideologues, these crazies, with their zombie-like, I think that word you used earlier in the program is absolutely right. They are zombies, marching